last word.
Yeah, let the record show. I totally agree with Robert De Niro. I am one of those people that suffer from Trump derangement syndrome. I think he is a threat to democracy.
Really?
I think that he led an attempted coup in this country. You know, he said he wanted to suspend the Constitution to overthrow the results of an election. At the least, that's just not a patriotic thing to say.
I don't believe that.
He absolutely said that on Truth Social.
I will look that up.
He did.
He wanted to suspend the Constitution?
He said we should suspend the Constitution to overthrow the results of an election. He said it on Truth Social, then said he didn't say it.
That was Charlamagne Tha God on Gutfeld on Fox News, and I'll play more from it in just a second here. And the part that really irritates me in just a second where a Fox host jumps in. But as you could tell, Gutfeld shocked and sort of trying to shut down what Charlamagne Tha God was saying, even though what Charlamagne was saying was absolutely accurate, which is Trump did call for, and the term he was using was suspend. The actual word is terminate. Trump called for the termination of the Constitution, and I'll put the post up on screen. A massive fraud of this type magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. If you're a viewer of the show, you've heard me say that so many times because of what you just watched there. Because people get away with defending Trump by basking in how uninformed they are. I don't get this political strategy, but it works. You just go, no, I don't think that happened, but we'll check on it. Then you never check on it. It did happen. He did say that. It's still up on his Truth Social account. Heck, I'll put the Truth Social link in the description of this video if you want to go check yourself. Yes, a candidate who wants to take an oath to the Constitution if he wins this election for president of the United States called for the termination of that Constitution in service of his election lies, saying that's what would justify getting rid of the Constitution. So that need to be fact-checked before going further. And I'll also talk about how the appearance here from Charlamagne Tha God is related to a broader context. We'll go through a bunch, but first, here's more.
So I read Project 25. I'm one of those guys that's like, I don't know if he will necessarily leave. I hope he does, as you said.
I think even if I think this happens more with our presidents than I think, because now we can see everything, and Trump made everything so transparent because he was on TV every day and everyone was watching the camera.
Yeah. I'm
willing to bet, and again, I'm not justifying the bad behavior of January 6th, but I'm willing to bet every president, when he got the note that he was not, when he was out, they were calling everybody like, can we fix this? Are we sure? Mm-hmm. And I think just given the fact that Biden's biggest claim to fame was he got to be Barack Obama's VP.
I'm going to really quickly pause your viewing of this video to ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel if you're enjoying the content by clicking that subscribe button. Thank you so much.
And it was more of the Barack. I voted for Barack twice. I voted for Trump. Looks like it's going to be 3 times now. But the point is like it was the greatness of Barack that helped him over. Now that there's no more Barack, this is all Biden's presidency, and it's been embarrassing. So people are like, are we willing to go back to a poor sport who at least was getting our taxes right, or a wandering fool who's letting the worst part of the Democratic Party get their stuff past him because he doesn't have the...
Neither. We deserve better. The American people deserve better from both parties.
I'm not running, though. All right, we got to move on.
Right, choose.
There would be no women in your cabinet.
I'll have you know, I have lots of women in my cabinet.
I'll stop it there, and I'll show you Charlamagne Tha God on The View in just a second. And that's sort of why he got invited on Fox News, it seems, because lately he's been saying what you heard there. So the beginning, sort of like what we talk about with Bill Maher, the beginning was great, him setting very clearly his stance and making clear the stakes of this election, and Trump's a threat to democracy, and I'm proudly experiencing Trump derangement syndrome, right? All that, and I love it. And then that's sort of what was causing Gutfeld to panic and say, oh, I don't think that happened, no, because it's sort of hard to defend such a statement from Trump. But then Charlamagne Tha God gets into the stance that he often espouses, which is this, both are horrible. Now, he does say Trump's worse, but it's a lot of the both are horrible type of mentality. And that's why in this segment, after watching his appearance on The View, I want to talk about Biden's record again, but in more detail than we've done recently, because a bunch of people like the Fox host that you saw there get away with pretending like Biden's record's something that it's not. And it really drives me crazy that we're having political conversations based on 1% of the facts of those subjects. And so then we're wasting all of this time, all these pundits, all these people getting paid a bunch of money on shows like that to have political discussions with absolutely no knowledge of what's being discussed. Because the Fox host that brought up the point about, I bet all presidents try to do what Trump did in blocking the peaceful transfer of power. All he's referencing is he's heard something about Trump saying something about not wanting to leave. He doesn't know that there was this nationwide, allegedly illegal scheme led by Trump to block the peaceful transfer of power through schemes like the fake electors scheme, trying to get fraudulent electors accepted and pressuring his vice president to accept those, and what he was wanting local officials to do, and obviously inside the mob to attack the Capitol. But all he probably knows about is January 6th, and Trump said some things. Why don't you just go learn about the things and then see if you can defend them? Same thing with the termination of the Constitution. You spend every day, Gutfeld, defending Trump, and you don't even know about one of the most notable things he's ever said, which is we should terminate the United States Constitution. And it drives me crazy. Why are all these people out there learning so much if these are the people who get to go and inform so many Americans? Oof, really hurts my brain. But before going further, here is Charlamagne Tha God on The View.
Book is all about having real conversations. Let's get to it. Let's get real. Now, you have a massive platform reaching millions of listeners, and you and I have talked about this before. You endorsed Joe Biden back in 2020, but this time around, you say you're not going to endorse anybody. Charlamagne, now is not the time, in my opinion, to sit this one out.
Yeah, I didn't say that. I never said I was sitting it out.
What you gonna do?
I'm definitely voting in November, but what I like to focus on is issues, not individuals. Like, you know, when
But why not endorse?
Huh?
Why not endorse Biden?
Because if I'm sitting here telling my listeners that, you know, you have somebody out there who is a threat to democracy, you have somebody out there who said they want to, you know, suspend the Constitution to overthrow the results of an election. You saw this person, you know, try to lead an attempted coup of this country. And I'm telling people that this guy is a threat to democracy. Have you ever read Project 25? There's only 2 candidates out there. So if I'm saying that about this individual, the choice is clear, right? And I've seen y'all do this on The View before. I saw y'all do this to Killer Mike when he was on The View, and Killer Mike literally sat here and said, hey, you know, I supported Keisha Lance Bottoms. I supported Ralph Warnock. I supported John Ossoff, right, in Georgia. And he said, you should support the people that I've supported. You should support the person who the people I've supported are supporting.
Okay.
That's y'all opportunity to say, well, clearly he's talking about President Biden. Why do y'all need us to say this if we don't feel comfortable saying it?
No, it's not that we need you to say it, but I think other folks need to hear, because, you know, one of the things I'm sorry, I just jumped you, I'm sorry, but one of the things that we've been talking about is the fact that getting facts out through the media has been seems to be very difficult.
I feel like I just spewed some facts.
Yeah.
Yes, but we need you to do it on your show.
Well, the reality is I think both candidates are trash. So but I am going to vote in November, and I'm going to vote my best interest, and I'm going to vote who I think, you know, can preserve democracy. So if I think both candidates are trash and I don't feel like, you know, endorsing one, would you rather me endorse an individual or endorse the fact that, hey, we need to go out here and protect democracy?
And by the
But if right now, one of the key ways we can protect democracy is by not electing Trump and electing Biden, then why wouldn't you just say that explicitly? And everything I'm about to go through is with all the respect in the world to Charlamagne Tha God, but it's super important we call this out because I'm hearing this sentiment far too prevalently. And I just want to say clearly, I think some people assume that premise. Yeah, both candidates are trash, but let me explain to you why it's so important to vote for the less bad trash, which when that is the situation, it still is important that you do that. But also, both candidates aren't trash, and we need to stop accepting that premise. One's trash, really, really bad trash, disgusting trash that has been in a landfill for hundreds of years. Okay, so you get the point. And the other is one of the most successful presidents we've seen in modern American history. And I'll prove that point to you in just a second, but that I think also needs to be some pushback. But the sentiment I've heard in my personal life, we're hearing from prominent streamers here, from Hassan Piker. I, for one, am excited to watch, he said about the debates between Biden and Trump. 280-plus-year-old men yap about a bunch of issues they almost completely align on with respect to policy while acting as though they're miles apart from one another. They are miles apart. That's a ridiculous statement, just absolutely nonsense stuff there. And I will say, before getting into the policy conversation, to Charlamagne Tha God's point, if even separate from the fact that Biden actually has a policy record that I think Charlamagne Tha God, if he were to listen to this segment, for example, would actually be much more supportive of. But a lot of people don't know about all the things we'll go through. But even setting that aside, if indeed he believes that Trump is an existential threat to democracy, as he said, then why would you want to be on the record expressing the importance of this election through sort of riddles? The person that's supported by the people that I support is who I support. What? But what? Shouldn't we just say clearly, in the most stark language possible, Biden's the person, if you want to protect democracy, that you vote for, and if you want all the good policies. But just on democracy, if you want to protect democracy, vote for Biden. And the fact that he's not willing to say that is definitely confusing to me. Now, one of the most aggravating aspects of American politics is, and I know this sounds way too cheerleady, but I'm going to say it because it's how I feel. I think Biden's going to go down in history as one of the most underrated presidents in history in terms of the public perception while he's president. Maybe later on it'll become more positive. But right now, the perception about him and how unaligned that is with his record and the reality about him. And when I talk to people, it just takes going through some of these policies for their mind to completely change about him is stunning. And I'll remind you, as we do talk about this, that policies that impact people's lives, millions of people's lives, and in many cases are a matter of life and death, are basic necessities, are clean and reliable drinking water, are the foundational elements of people's communities. Those policies and the record of a president on those policies means so much more than these surface level conversations we get obsessed with. And so if more of the media had the conversations that I think we often have here, I think we would have a very different situation with people's perception of President Biden's presidency. It's not that it's perfect, but we're way whacked out in the other direction in terms of public perception of people thinking far worse than I think aligns with the facts. So let's go through it. Biden comes into office, and to set the scene, we forget this. MAGA world's trying to convince us that Biden took over in 2019 or something. Biden takes over, and there's a public health, economic, and social crisis. Disasters on all fronts. Thousands of Americans dying every day from COVID. So many businesses, people's lives had been crushed. Unemployment was high. Inflation was poised to spike. Crime was sky high. One of the largest increases in homicide rates in history took place in 2020 under Trump in the United States. And Biden's predecessor, Trump, wasn't helping him transition into office and was thinking he was going to block the peaceful transfer of power. And the reason why that's notable is not just the threat to democracy piece of it, but people don't get that normally you have an incoming administration who's helped in massive ways by the outgoing administration with a smooth transition. There's whole teams set up to work with each other to coordinate that. You know what Trump was doing? Don't give certain briefs to Biden. Don't coordinate it with Biden's transition team. And some people, interestingly enough, were doing it secretly, trying their best, but Trump would completely prevent those in his administration from doing what was necessary to create a smooth transition from one administration to another, which meant that is chaotic at any point in time if any president did that. But we were in the middle of this global crisis once in a century. And instead of being properly informed on what was being done, what needed to be done, the logistics of things, how the transition could go smoothly, the opposite was happening with Biden. So that's the set of conditions he had to take over. Crisis on all fronts. And a predecessor who wasn't helping him transition into power. And not only did he oversee this stunning recovery, but we'll talk more about that in just a little bit, about the results of the different policy achievements. He was able to not just recover us from the crisis, him and all the people involved, Democrats in Congress, etc., but oversee legislative success that we haven't seen from a president in decades. And to emphasize that point, I want to go piece by piece. This won't be all of it, but just to give you a sense. The American Rescue Plan, right when Biden comes into office, again, I talked about all those crises. This is about recovery efforts. Child tax credit, vaccine rollout, super important, which was a disaster under Trump. Biden fixed it up a lot. Economic stimulus, all sorts of things to open schools, open businesses, to get us back to normal. Then the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act came next. Investments in roads and bridges, public transit, passenger and freight rail improvements, airports, ports and waterways, broadband internet investments, water infrastructure replacing lead pipes and service lines. Super important. The fact that we haven't done that completely is crazy. Improving water quality, and a reminder that 10 million Americans don't have access to clean and reliable drinking water right now. That's what this is about, investing in energy infrastructure as well, modernizing the power grid, becoming more resilient against natural disasters, and then green energy investments as well, promoting that transition to renewable energy in ways that will lower costs for consumers. And that was the largest investment in infrastructure since the Eisenhower Highway Program, historic. Then things I don't talk as much about, but important: Postal Service. I'm going through chronologically. Postal Service Reform Act, which aimed to improve the financial stability of the U.S. Postal Service. And that's important for so many reasons, one of them being that life-saving medicine gets sent to especially rural communities through the Postal Service because of its existence. So we got to make sure it's financially sustainable. The bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first major gun safety law in decades. And keep in mind, too, in this incredibly divided time, you have a pandemic and all the conditions it caused that Biden had to deal with. Still, bipartisanship is happening. The infrastructure law and the bipartisan Safer Communities Act just so far were bipartisan. Then you have the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson honoring our promise to address Comprehensive Toxics Act. That's the PACT Act that we refer to, which expands health care and benefits for veterans that were exposed to burn pits and other toxic substances while they were serving the country. And this is something that the troops Republicans, many of them voted against, like Senator Ted Cruz, as I recently called out on social media. And that PACT Act, by the way, just recently was announced in the last year since it was signed into law, or since it was signed into law. We've seen over 1 million applications accepted by the VA for people getting those healthcare expansions. Incredibly impactful. CHIPS and Science Act, investing in American manufacturing and specifically semiconductor manufacturing so that we can be less dependent on foreign supply chains and can make this in America, creating jobs, wealth in our communities, but also competing with China, less dependent on their supply chains. The Inflation Reduction Act, huge, monumental, historic, largest investment in renewable energy in history. Again, cheaper forms of energy for consumers. Also in the IRA, you had the capping of insulin costs for Medicare recipients specifically at $35 out of pocket per month. It was going to do it for everyone, but Republicans gutted that out of it successfully, unfortunately. And on that, here's a video that I want to show you.
What's your name?
Bob,
Hey,
I'd like to thank you for lowering the cost of my insulin. It makes a big difference in my life.
God love you. It does. It does.
Truly does.
For 2025,
Yeah.
no senior will ever have to pay more than $2,000 for every single drug they have.
That is, you don't know how I'm paying almost $5,000 a year and I'm on Medicare.
It's going to go down to a maximum of $2,000.
That's incredible.
Guaranteed.
We
Guaranteed.
love you, Mr. President.
God love you.
So this matters. Again, I would call out to Charlamagne Tha God or Hassan Piker or whoever else. This matters, and we're not even done. Not even close. Medicare is also now able to negotiate drug prices, which will decrease prescription drug costs for seniors. The Affordable Care Act got expanded. You now have more people with health insurance under President Biden than any time in American history. The IRS was more properly invested in to bring in extra revenue, more than it took to fund this program originally, brings in more revenue back, makes the government money from wealthy individuals who are unlawfully cheating on their taxes, a 15% minimum corporate tax. If you don't think that should be a minimum, I don't know what's wrong with you, and much more in the Inflation Reduction Act, but we'll move on from that. A lot of people don't know this, largest federal investment in public safety, law enforcement, and violence reduction in American history under President Biden. I'll say it again, and keep this in mind when we go and talk about the impact on crime. Largest federal investment in public safety, law enforcement, and violence reduction in American history under President Biden. And that's across multiple pieces of legislation and executive orders. Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, which established Juneteenth, the day commemorating the end of slavery in the United States, as a federal holiday. The Respect for Marriage Act, which protects marriage equality. And then we'll get into the executive orders, and I'll try to go quickly through those. But just keep in mind, again, people saying, oh, they're both trash. Oh, I guess, yeah, democracy, we should protect that, but they're sort of both horrible. Would Trump have done any of that? No. He was mismanaging the crisis, so all the crisis-related pieces of legislation and policies clearly weren't working as effectively as they worked under Biden. But also, the legislation there not only is a vote for Biden, a vote against authoritarianism, but also for common sense, meaningful, impactful policy solutions to problems that we're facing. I should note, when we're talking about legislation, Biden's currently supportive of one of the most major border security bills that we've seen in decades, endorsed by the Border Patrol Union. But who's obstructing that getting passed? MAGA Republicans in Congress, because they don't want to give Biden a win on the border, as we've talked so much about. And on executive orders, this might get a little bit tedious, so I'll go quickly, but you just have all different executive order on economic relief related to the COVID-19 pandemic on January 22nd, 2021. So you have all the different executive orders, but the general picture is that a bunch of executive orders to address the different issues that were put into place by the pandemic, the operation of schools, trying to get schools opened. You have an executive order on reforming our incarceration system to eliminate the use of privately operated criminal detention facilities, specifically directed the Department of Justice to phase out contracts with private prisons, which should have been done a long time ago. An executive order on strengthening Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. And again, right now under Biden, more people with health insurance than any time in American history. An executive order on promoting competition in the American economy. There have been hundreds, so we can't go through all of them, but just different things. Numerous executive orders on gun violence reduction, more than any other president in American history. He raised the minimum wage for federal government workers, which is the largest employer in the country, as I'm sure you're aware. Buy American rules for the government that helps to boost American manufacturing. You have more student debt relief than any president in American history under President Biden. Reproductive rights related executive orders. Reforming the criminal justice system, investments in impoverished communities, on policing, like I talked about with the law enforcement investments, etc. Then some other things, non-executive order. Most pro-union president in American history. If you consider yourself pro-labor and pro-organized labor, Biden's your guy. First president to join the picket line with striking workers. That strike led to a historically incredible deal for UAW workers. Biden's National Labor Relations Board has been incredibly pro-union and is contributing to a resurgence of organized labor in America. Ketanji Brown Jackson got onto the Supreme Court and is fantastic. He's, like I said, currently supporting that border bill. So for the conservatives, Biden would still be your guy even on that issue. He ended America's longest war. And let's stop there and get into the results. So those are the policy achievements. What results have we seen? And we'll just focus in on economic results and crime-related results. So in that recovery, we've outpaced in our GDP growth comparable economies across the world, all the other major economies. We've effectively recovered. We were doing far worse in dealing with the pandemic for a while there, and then we recovered way better, in large part because of the policy agenda of President Biden and Democrats. 14 million plus jobs were created. Just all these jobs with all those different pieces of legislation that I mentioned to you. Currently experiencing strong wage growth, stronger job growth after the recovery of all the pre-pandemic jobs than we saw under Trump. So even before the crisis, we weren't seeing the job growth we're seeing under Biden after we recovered all pre-pandemic jobs. Unemployment has been lower for longer than it's been in 50 years. Black unemployment at record lows. White-black unemployment gap at record small. Inflation significantly down. And by the way, if you do, we talked about this in a bonus show. You can get access to the bonus show by clicking the join button below. But if you think Biden caused inflation because of spending, Trump spent more in his recovery efforts than Biden did in his. And then obviously the Fed pumped in the most amount of money. I'll show that visual on screen. The stock market's breaking records now, and all those economic figures. Again, it's not that there aren't still real problems. There are. But the fact that we got here this quickly after the disaster that Trump left, in large part because of the pandemic and Trump's mishandling of it, is incredible. And if Trump oversaw these exact same numbers, if he had been reelected and had to deal with the recovery efforts, Fox News would be saying it was some type of miracle. Then on crime, after that massive spike in crime, crazy, one of the largest spikes in homicide rates, as I said, in American history in 2020. Crime has plummeted under President Joe Biden. Across the board now, down to pre-pandemic levels in 2023. Violent crime near more than 50-year lows, lower than it was under Trump, even before the pandemic. And that happened just a few years after a massive spike, in part because of those huge investments I told you into public safety, law enforcement, violence reduction, gun violence specifically reduction. And homicide rates look like they are going to continue to plummet as we're getting our first preliminary numbers in the beginning of 2024. So pretty historic. Overseeing us getting pulled out of the crisis that we were in more successfully than other countries, and all the while having this crazy list of legislative achievements that you heard some of in that list. And so, yes, it's fine to be concerned about his age or places where he hasn't done enough. But I think it's due time that figures with huge amount of influence make sure they're informed on all these things and make sure that their audiences are informed on all these things. And after that, after discussing the policies that impact millions of Americans' lives like Biden's age doesn't, then if you still want to say they're both trash, then, you know, that's your prerogative. And I will say, to end this, it just may be that Biden has been that effective as president, not despite his age, but because of it and the experience and wisdom and stuff that went along with it. Not to get too cheerleady, but again, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you thought of all that in the comments.